This video covers the lecture that was presented on the 27th of July. There's a document called Lecture 27 July available in Moodle that gives all the code and the question. I would suggest that you have this document handy before you go through the video. It will just help you to get context, and that you pause the video now to read the question, which is also on the document if you need to read it there. When doing this kind of thing, the easiest place to start is what I call the unit class. In this scenario, it is class client. And you first of all say to yourself, what are the attributes of the unit class? And if you read the question, it says for each client, you keep the name, the number of tickets, and then they also say each ticket costs 75 Rand. So we decide on these three attributes: name, number of tickets, and price. Secondly, we need to say to ourselves, what does the constructor look like? Now for the constructor, we say which of these attributes are unique to each client, have unique values and need to be initialized, and which of them have values that are the same always, so they don't need to be initialized through the parameters. Clearly in this case it's name and number of tickets, and you'll see they are the two parameters in the constructor. And then price is always 75, so we initialize price to 75. Then methods that you will always have are your get methods. So you could probably by default just write down your get methods. It's in this case get name and get number of tickets. The price maybe if you wanted to, but not very critical in this case. Notice your get methods are public, and the reason they are public is because your attributes are by default private, and you need to be calling these methods from the outside to get access to the attributes name and number of tickets. Something else that is also very standard in this kind of question is what you do in the application class, always called class program, but we refer to it as the application class inside the main method. That's where you would declare a list of your units. In this case it's clients, so you'll see there you have constant that says I'm catering for 10 clients. You declare the array list and you set number of elements to 0. These are kind of standard coding that will normally happen. There's obviously different ways to answer this question, but the next step that I would recommend is to look at your question, and normally there's a list of bullets of things that needs to be done, as you see on the screen here, and then you could say to yourself at this stage, which of these things need methods in the unit class? Just to emphasize, methods in the unit class are methods that will be working with one unit, so in this case with one client at a time. So the first one is adding a new client. The only thing you need in the method class to be able to add a new client is obviously the constructor, because you'll be creating a new object. So that we already have. The second one is changing a client's tickets. And the third one, adding new tickets for a client. So first of all, let's try and understand the difference between these two. Changing tickets means simply the value for number of tickets was wrong, and it now simply changes to something else. It's your typical set tickets method. So normally you have set methods for attributes, and this one the set method is simply just used to change the attribute to another value. Adding new tickets for a client also changes the value of number of tickets, but it's slightly different. It doesn't just change it. In this case, it adds a value to it. So if you send through the parameter number into add tickets, it's added to number of tickets. So if the client had bought 4 tickets and you send through 2, it's now 6. Now to set tickets simply just assigns number of tickets to number. And then the fourth thing that needs to be done is to display all the bills of a client. Now this method, display inside the unit class, is a very standard method. Notice it only displays one client. So you simply normally have right line statements that displays the attributes of the client. In this case, the last right line statement also calculates the total price, which is number of tickets times price. Be very careful in any of these methods, especially the display method. You would very seldom use, for example, a for loop, because if you're trying to put a for loop inside your unit class, it means that you're trying to address normally more than one client or more than one unit. So the bottom rule, the main rule for methods in the unit class is they address only one unit. You don't need to traverse a list normally in those methods. Okay, let's go through these 4 tasks which were given in the question. Obviously, for any question there will be different sets of tasks. These aren't standard tasks, but for this example, let's go through them. The first one is adding a new client. What I'll do every time is I'll show you what method in the application class does it and which method in the unit class does it use. So in this case, we define a method add client in the application class, and it will be using the constructor on the left hand side. So whenever we're adding a new client, we'll be using the constructor inside the unit class. But let's go through the add client step by step. Notice the heading of add client and specifically the parameter list. Obviously you want to add to the list, so you send through the list as a parameter and then the number of elements. Because the number of elements will be changing, remember you're adding one, it's a reference parameter. Right, the first part of the add client method is simply getting the information from the user. So in this case, you're asking the user for the name and for the number of tickets relevant for this client. So that will be just normal write line and read line statements. While we're looking at this, very seldom will we have write lines and read lines in unit classes. We normally send data through as parameters, but that's not a golden rule, unfortunately. Okay, now the last 2 lines of add client. Let's look at list number of elements is assigned to new client. We first need to evaluate what's happening on the right hand side, which is new client, name, number of tickets. Clearly this calls the constructor, but in your mind you must imagine I'm creating a new object which has the name and the number of tickets for that object. Once that is done, I link the pointer of list number of elements to this object. So let's just go through this statement step by step. On the right hand side, new client, name, number of tickets. Let's say the user entered Clola and 7. That creates an object, but notice the object is not linked to the list yet. It's just an object on its own. As soon as you say list number of elements is assigned to, since this is the first element, number of elements is 0, the pointer at position 0 now points to this object. So the object is now linked to the array. And then the next step is simply increasing number of elements. The next task is changing a client's ticket. So on the right hand side in my application class, I will have this long method that will do everything that I need to be done. And the method in the unit class that it uses is set tickets. It simply changes the number of tickets inside the unit class. Right, so the first thing that needs to happen is the user enters the name of the client whose tickets will be changing. And then the find method is called. You'll remember we did the find method last semester. The next slide will go into more detail. But at this stage, we just believe that the find method returns the position in the array where the specific client is found. Or if it's not found, it will return a -1. Okay, quickly let's just revise the find method. We'll go through it step by step. It takes in the list, the number of elements and the string we're looking for, in this case the name. It has a for loop that literally goes through the list, and then as soon as it finds the specific client, it returns X, which is the position where it would find it. If it goes right through the for loop and never returns anything, obviously it did not find it, and then it returns the -1. Okay, please terminate this video and go to the part B video for the rest of the lecture.